South Korea's youth are protesting an election again. This time it's different. In 1960, Korean university students took to the streets. The president had just stolen an election. The ballot stuffing was brazen, the results were impossible, and the students, who had nothing to lose and everything to prove, marched. Yes, this is history. The April 19th revolution, the president fled, democracy briefly won. People remember it as a story about courage, and people thought it's never gonna happen again. But here's what they don't say out loud. The students didn't march because they loved one party. They marched because they could not trust anyone in power, and that feeling is back. Yes, it's happening again. June 3rd, 2026, South Korea holds local election and something goes wrong. Ballot papers run out at more than a dozen polling stations in Seoul and Gyeonggi province. Voters who waited in line for hours are turned away. Some hold number tickets, proving they were there. Some are told to come back, some never get to vote. It only happened to places where conservative party were big. The National Election Commission apologizes, says it was logical failure, says it's not ground for a rerun. By the next morning, protesters are surrounding the vote counting center at Olympic Park in Songpa. By night 2, there are 20,000 people. By day 6, university students' councils from over 100 schools across the country have issued formal declarations. Seoul University, Korean University, Yonsei University, the kids are back in the street. And this time, this is about Democratic Party, and this time they're not waving any party's flag. Yes, Democratic Party has been too arrogant, and students are judging. Students are out protesting again. Let's establish what actually happened on June 3rd because the facts mattered before the interpretation. South Korea had local elections, mayor, governor, district heads across 16 major cities and provinces. And yes, people have been doing bets over this. Turnout was higher than expected. This is not controversial. Both sides agree on this. Yes, total win of a Democratic Party at more than a dozen polling stations. But there are mysteries, and in Songpa and in some areas, when people do not support Democratic parties, there have been some incidents. No paper to vote. Is that possible in this 21st century? It's a basic job to print out enough ballot papers, and the head of the NEC said he would resign. He said there was no excuse. He said it's a democratic process. Is it really true? He is correct. The question is, how much distrust and why did this happen? But before we get to the interpretation, there's one more factual item from June 3rd that nobody should skip past. The twin votes. This is hilarious. In the Incheon mayor elections early vote results, two different districts, Songdo Il-dong and Songdo I-dong, came back with the exact same number. Is this possible? 3,030 votes. In the Jeonnam Gwangju mayor early vote results, 5 pairs of twin votes. In the Incheon mayoral elections early vote results, 2 different precincts, Songdo Il-dong and Songdo I-dong, came back with the exact same number. Is it possible? Yes, the Democratic Party candidate, 3,030 votes. People Power Party candidate, 1,440 votes. Exactly same. Both precincts identical to the last digit. And it happened in more than one district. In the Jeonnam Gwangju mayor early vote results, 5 pairs of precincts, 10 location total came back with the first and second place candidates receiving the exact same vote counts as another precinct. PPP leader Chang Dong-hyuk went on record saying the probability of 2 precincts producing identical results is 1 in 600 million. Is that common? No, but did it happen? Yes. The NEC responded that this was a selective aggregation of data and a coincidence. Statisticians who were interviewed said the same, that with 253 electoral districts, each with early vote totals ranged from 1,000 to 5,000 votes, the birthday problem applies the number of possible matching pairs is large enough that coincidences are mathematically expected. Even a conservative commentator noted that twin numbers appeared frequently under the Park Geun-hye government too. So the statisticians say it's explainable. The NEC says coincidence, But here's the thing, when you add the twin votes to the ballot shortage to the NEC server, vulnerabilities that the National Intelligence Service confirmed, each individually explainable, each individually dismissed, the cumulative effect on public trust is not statistical. Even if it could be possible, nobody trusts government anymore. It's psychological, and psychological trust in electoral institutions, once damaged, does not recover through press releases. No matter how much stock prices rise, no matter how much tax they collect, people do not trust government anymore. It is not Democratic Party anymore. It's just old privileged party. Here's what it gets complicated. I want to be careful here because this is where people start seeing what they want to see. South Korea has had an election fraud controversy running in the back since 2020. The conservative bloc PPP Yoon's party, the people who just lost badly in multiple consecutive elections, except for a few districts, has spent 6 years insisting that the early voting results were manipulated. Their argument that early vote margins consistently favored the opposition more than same-day vote margins. In some districts, the gap was statistically surprising. The court heard 182 fraud complaints since 2020. Every single one was dismissed. Multiple police investigations found no evidence of manipulation. Yes, of course, police always say there's no evidence because they stand for the government. The NEC, which has vulnerabilities in its server security confirmed by the National Intelligence Service, says those vulnerabilities were never exploited. And NEC, that place, has a hell of a secret. The conservative fraud narrative is on the velvet evidence, not supported, and the people who work there, they all retire, all resign. Who get the next job? They're kids. It's like the royals. But, and this is real, the ballot paper shortage on June 3rd is not a conspiracy theory. It is an actual fact covered in all news outlets. It happened. Reuters was there, NBC was there, Yonhap News was there, and NEC admitted it. The voters were turned away. The right to vote was concretely denied to real people in real districts. The AC apologized and said it would conduct a full investigation, but maintained the incidents did not constitute grounds for a rerun election. How much of an important great excuse do we need for rerun election? Everyone wants it except for the NEC. Whether you believe the shortage was incompetence or something worse depends on what you think of the institution managing, and that's where the youth protest gets interesting. Because here's what the protesters at Olympic Park were saying, and this is important. This battle is no longer about Democratic Party or Conservative Party. This battle is more about fairness. It's more about justice, more about young people's voice heard. Protesters said, we must unite, which one voice called only for re-election, violation of suffrage in the national anthem, wave only the Korean flag, not party flags, we refuse political party involvement. Not the Democrats cheated, not we want you back, not this is a conservative protest, this is just pure unfairness. The democracy, voting for Democratic Party does not say democracy. Protesters drew a deliberate line between themselves and conspiracy theorists, which one demonstrator saying, I think there are many people trying to muddy the waters by mixing conspiracy theories with election fraud. A 21-year-old protester said, this is a violation of the right to vote. Yes, Constitution protects the law, but a party, a leader cannot block it. These are not people demanding that current president should lose or current party should get out of power. They are people demanding that elections be run properly regardless of who wins. Voting for Democratic Party does not guarantee democracy anymore. That is a fundamentally different kind of protest. Law is a law. It should be kept, and principle exists for a reason. The university student councils are the piece that makes this historically resonant. Many universities issue formal declarations condemning the ballot shortage, demanding accountability from the NSC. Here's the darker political layer that everyone is thinking of. You are seeing it clearer. The Democratic Party won the local elections. The ballot shortage happened in districts where Depending on who you ask, the outcome may or may not have been affected. The Democratic Party's response has been careful. President said there is a clear difference between using constant agitation and indoctrination for political purposes and raising the question, how could people be unable to vote? The failure to ensure voting rights was serious, regardless of whether it affected the election outcome. This is the correct answer, technically, but the correct answer delivered by the winner to the people who couldn't vote lands differently than it reads on paper. The PPP, the conservative opposition, called the shortage a serious breach of voting rights. They're right, they're also the party that spent 6 years crying wolf about fraud they couldn't prove in any court. So the party with no credibility is raising a legitimate complaint, and that's why no one's listening, and that's why the Democratic Party is using that loophole. And the party that won is expressing concern about a failure that they also benefited from, or at least didn't lose because of. Both sides are saying the right words. Neither side is fully trustworthy. And the students in the street waving only Korean flags, refusing party involvement, demanding accountability from an institution rather than a result. Maybe they're the only ones who have the right framing. So here's the final question that Korean democracy is sitting with right now. The NEC is a constitutional body. Yes, it may have many backstories, but it is a constitutional body. It is supposed to be independent. It is supposed to be trustworthy, which no one is believing. If it cannot print enough ballot papers, a task with a known date, a known expected turnout, a known number of voters registered, that is either extraordinary incompetence or something worse. Both possibilities are bad. Extraordinary institutional incompetence at the most basic function of a democracy is not comforting. Something worse is less comforting still. What the students in the street are demanding is not a particular outcome. They are demanding that the institution that runs democracy in South Korea be held accountable when it fails. That is not a conservative demand. That is not a progressive demand. That is the most basic demand that citizens and democracy can make. The question is whether anyone in power is listening. In 1960, they weren't. In 2026, we will see.